Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. So glad you all can be with us. For those tuning in on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on X, we're glad to have you with us. We're going to connect with our friends over on Amazon to begin our segment. We're excited to welcome a special guest to our broadcast who's celebrating a great book I think you guys definitely want to add to your reading list. If you guys are new to us on the social media platforms, make sure you guys are hitting the follow button over there so you can stay connected with us. And we're now live on Amazon Live for Cyrus Webb Presents. If you guys are new to us on Amazon, make sure you guys hit the follow button too. You'll see it either here in this corner or down below. You also will see the latest book by our next guest. We're excited to welcome Robert Inman to our broadcast. Robert has written a fascinating book that I think has a little something for everyone. It's called Villages. You guys can see it there in the carousel. We want to talk to Robert not only about his love of storytelling, but also what it's been like for him to share that with all of you. And of course, we'll let you guys know how to stay connected with him too. Robert, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Look, it's my pleasure to have you on, and congratulations again on Villages. One thing about you, Robert, that's very, very clear in Villages is that your love of details when it comes to characters. So I'm curious, what has it been like for you to see the way that your readers have responded to Jonas and the characters they meet in Villages?
Well, character is at the heart of all of my storytelling, and I write novels, I write movie scripts, I write stage plays, I write songs, and I always begin with a central character that I believe in. I don't need to know everything about him because he or she will reveal themselves through the book, through the course of the story. But the central character is important. Put them in a particular time and place, surround them with other characters, and give them a dilemma. And that very simply is the formula that I use for my writing. In imagining Jonas, I drew from relationships, friendships with younger people, with my own grandchildren, from my experience as an Army veteran,
Mhm.
and from growing up in a small town. Uh, Most of my books are set in small southern towns. And to me, towns, a place can be a character.
Yes.
It can have so much impact on the people who live there and interact with each other and bump up against each other and make sparks and make a story. So all of those elements go into imagining Jonas Boulware, my 21-year-old veteran who is at the heart of Villages.
Yeah. I love that you talked about that about the characters kind of basically are evolving in front of you, because I think Robert, what is so interesting is in reading Villages and thinking about this conversation with you, is that it does seem as though you're one of those authors that's not afraid to put their their main character in harm's way, but also to allow us to go through the journey of how they come out of it. In Villages, Jonas goes through a lot of different things, both internally and externally. Was that part of the fun for you to get to know not only what made him how he was, but also what helped him to move forward in his life?
Absolutely. Sometimes I teach writing workshops, and I always tell the people in the writing workshop, go to your work every day that you possibly can, because you imagine this world populated with your characters and in their particular time and place. And you need to go visit them every day you can, because they will tell you things that are going on in their lives. They really take over the story, and my job is to follow along and write down what they tell me. And I tell folks in the writing workshop, if you don't go visit them every time you possibly can, then you show up one day and they say, oh, we had some things to tell you, but we forgot them now. So you just missed out on that.
Yeah.
So you're in their world, and they're leading you through their world, and they're revealing things. And the dilemma is at the heart of it. And of course, for Jonas, his dilemma is very much the heart of the story.
Yeah. And there's the idea of trauma. I was telling someone about this book today, Robert. The idea of trauma shows up in so many different ways. And as you talked about with him, being someone who was a veteran himself, you being able to relate to that. That, of course, when we think about battles, the word battles, we think about the physical, the idea of combat and conflict. But I love the fact the layers of Jonas is that a lot of what he was dealing with was happening even before he got to the battlefield. What was that like for you, kind of to give a space for his internal struggles he was dealing with at home, but also in his own insecurities for himself?
Right. Well, he grows up in this small southern town, in a dysfunctional family, an abusive father, a mother who is haunted by an old family scandal, and his father is just not a good father to him. In fact, 2 months before he graduates from high school, the father kicks him out of the house. So he takes that into his life as a young veteran. He joins the Navy right out of high school. He is a natural caregiver. He just is compelled to take care of people. And so he becomes a medic. In the Navy, they call him a hospital corpsman, but that's a medic. And after he finishes, he is assigned to a Marine combat platoon in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, somewhere like that. And that's where he meets the trauma that causes his PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. He's involved in a battle. He's badly wounded, but he performs a heroic act. And he comes back to recover. But he also has all of the trauma of his childhood that he takes with him. Yeah. And what the psychologists call complex PTSD. So he has all of this internal stuff going on. He's dealing with his haunting from the battlefield, but he's also trying to reconcile with his past. And in all of this, try to find a way forward he knows he has a new normal. Yeah. So how do I cope with that? How do I become as much of a whole person as possible? I'll never be the same person because of all I've been through. We carry our baggage with us through life. Yeah. But we learn how to deal with it.
Yeah. I love that. I think the character's name is Fred. Is that right?
Fred Wesley.
Fred. And so I, as you were talking, I thought about a scene with Fred, something that may seem so simple, like watching a game, right? And how things can be triggered. And I bring that up because thinking about Jonas and what our audience, I think, can relate to is that a lot of times something someone says, a sound, sometimes a smell, may trigger us in things that, we've tried to deal with in our lives. And I thought that was so. Was this? Did you feel a personal connection to Jonas in writing him, Robert?
Oh, absolutely. Some writers say, "Oh, well, that's not me in the book." Well, where do your characters come from? They come from everything you are, every place you've been, every person you've known, every idea you've had, and they all go in. They go in here and in here. And you draw from that in imagining the characters. So very much so. I mean, Jonas is me. And Jonas takes over the story. I start off by imagining Jonas, at least at the beginning, and then Jonas takes over. And he does things and says things and thinks things that sometimes surprise me, sometimes disturb me. Sometimes make me angry, but that's him. I've let him go. I've let him become his own person. But yes, very much. All of my characters, there's something of me in there.
Love that. And that's probably part of what readers take away. I want to say for those who are just tuning in, welcome. You're watching Cyrus Webb Presents. We're excited to welcome author Robert Inman to our broadcast today. We're talking to Robert about his newest book, Villages. You guys can see it here on Amazon. It's available now. We're going to also let you guys know how to stay connected with Robert. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to be able to put those in the chat as well. See you guys over there on YouTube too. Appreciate you guys being with us. Robert, let's go backwards if you don't mind, and then we're going to come back to villages. When
Okay.
did you realize, with all that you've done in your life, when did you realize that storytelling is something you wanted to do?
At a very early age, I grew up in a large, rowdy, storytelling Southern family. We told stories. That's what we did, and sometimes we just made them up because it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
My mother read to me when I was an infant. She gave me what I call the gift of imagination, and I've just always had this overactive imagination, and the love of telling people stories. I think when you can tell someone a story, they will remember it. You can give them facts, and that's one thing. But if you can tell them a relatable story about a person, then that's something they can remember. And that's just always been, it's part of my DNA. I grew up, telling stories and started writing stories at a very young age, and went to graduate school, studied creative writing at University of Alabama. But it grows out of that love of being able to tell let me tell you a story, and hopefully you'll remember the story, and hopefully you'll relate the story to your own life. And my readers have told me over the years, I know that place, or yeah, I know that person, or yeah, I can relate to that in some way. And when a reader tells me that I've connected with them in a personal way, that's the payoff for a storyteller.
I love that. Such a great point. For yourself, then, going back to villages, I want to say, when you were just talking now, you talked about storytelling. And one thing that we see with Jonas, Robert, in the book, at least me as a reader, is that he realizes he wants to move forward, but he's still kind of weighed down by what has happened to him, and what he feels like defines him. And I say it that way because I love the fact that as the story evolves, he's able to connect with people who appreciate him for him. Talk to us about the title. I mentioned this to you before we went live here about, I want you to tell our audience about the title. How did you settle on the title Villages for this book?
Well, it went through several versions, but I settled on Villages because there are really two villages here. There's the village in the Middle East where Jonas has his traumatic experience, and then there's the village of Copernicus, the little southern hometown where he comes home to after the war. And those two villages, impact, they are, as I said, they're characters, and they impact his life in very profound ways.
And I think too, for me, and I was saying to you before we went live, that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think a lot of times, even our support system, one thing I love about this book is that Jonas is able to realize that there are people who do appreciate him. Maybe he didn't get it exactly the way he may have wanted it at home. And that's something, readers can relate to, but he is able to find people who love him for him. How important was that for you to kind of let him know that he wasn't an island and that he wasn't by himself in the world?
Well, that the people who love him are key to his hope for dealing with his new normal. When Jonas comes back from combat and is recovering from his serious wounds, he doesn't remember what happened to him, and he doesn't want to. The psychologist at the hospital in the States, try to get him to remember things about the traumatic experience in combat. He says, I don't remember. I don't want to remember. I just want to get on with my life. But as he goes along, it's either pay me now or pay me later. And bits and pieces of that traumatic wartime experience intrude. Flashbacks, nightmares, shadowy figures at the edge of his consciousness.
Mhm.
The war is going to come back to him, whether he wants to or he doesn't want it to. But with these friends around him, they provide the kind of support for him, nobody's trying to heal him. They're
Yeah.
just trying to be there for him and say,
Right.
he has a friend who's a doctor who says, Jonas, you're one of the most compassionate people in the world, and don't ever let go of that. Don't ever let go of caring for people. And he that's part of his recovery
Yeah.
is caring about people, trying to help people.
Right. How much of that part resonates with you, Robert, when it comes to people seeing you for the gifts that you have to offer the world?
Well, I'm a caregiver. I've always wanted to make everything okay for
Yeah.
everybody around me. Especially my family.
Sure.
And I probably go overboard at that sometimes, but it's just natural to me. I,
Yeah.
I just have I love people, and I love people who need things.
Hmm.
And maybe sometimes I can give something. Maybe
Hmm.
not all the time, but
Yeah.
but I try.
Yeah. And I think again that's why a story like Villages is so powerful because again, like as I mentioned, as a reader, you can go through Jonas's experience, and even though you may not, and I said to you before we went live, you may not can relate to every aspect of his life, but there's something about his journey I think that will connect with you. Um, did you? I wanted to ask you this question. I honestly don't know the answer, so I'm asking for myself and my audience. Was Jonas one of those characters you would like to revisit again?
I always leave my characters where they are at the end of the book and let the reader imagine what's next.
Gotcha.
Um, no, I think I'll leave Jonas where he is
Where
and
he is.
and
Okay.
and let the reader absorb his story and learn about him internally and externally and imagine where he goes from here. I like to think at the end of the book there's a lot of hope for
Yeah,
Jones.
I feel that.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's up to you. If I write a book and 1,000 people read the book, I've really written 1,000 different books because all of us will bring our own perception to the book. So
Exactly.
you can write your own sequel.
I love that. I love that. You talked about, of course, helping other writers, Robert. So I have to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who's watching or listening to this broadcast today, who may have been thinking about writing their story? There's a story they've been living with. What advice would you give them to help them start putting the words out there?
Well, the first thing I would say is some advice that my fiction teacher in graduate school gave me. A guy named Barry Hanna from Mississippi.
Mm.
Barry said, the way you write is you apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. Um, you sit down and do it,
Yeah.
and you just blast some stuff, and it's not going to be right to begin with, but go ahead and do it. Put the story down on paper, and that helps you organize it. And
Mhm.
then the fun part is going back and making it better.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to school to learn to be a writer. Everybody has a story, and so you just sit down and apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. You have to be curious about the world. You have to be curious about people.
Mhm.
You have to be persistent and stubborn. You have to carve out time from your life, to do it.
Mhm.
But Barry Hanna's advice still holds true.
Love that. Great advice. I love that. Again, everyone, Robert Inman has been our guest. Great conversation with you, Robert. So glad we got a chance to connect. Again, the book is called Villages. You all can get it here on Amazon. Robert, how can our audience stay connected with you?
Go to my website. I'm at robert-inman.com. And I have a Facebook page, Robert Inman. And I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. So as Robert Inman. So I'm easy to find. So look me up.
right. Robert, looking forward to having you back again to discuss the next book.
Great. Thank you, Cyrus.
More than welcome. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.